This is Johnny Dosco. Stay tuned for another Scoresheet podcast. Holy Kadelka!
Hi, and welcome to another Scoresheet podcast. Today I thought I'd talk with my brother slash co-owner of Scoresheet, David Barton. How you doing, David?
Good. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing well. So this time of year here in early January is when we start setting up leagues for the upcoming season. Just to give you an idea of the timeline, we'll come out with the 2012 player lists right around January 23rd or 24th. We'll probably start our first brand new league web drafts the first week of February, and then the season starts this year Wednesday, April 4th. For continuing leagues, we'll ask for keepers the first week of February for leagues that are already in existence, and then those web drafts will start around the end of February. So the first thing I thought I'd talk to David about is the various leagues you could join this year, other than, I know many of you are in existing continuing leagues being ones where you keep players from year to year, and so hopefully you're keeping your teams in those. But for those of you that aren't already in a continuing league or maybe looking to add another league, we do offer a variety of options. David, you play in continuing leagues. What do you think of those?
Well, I think the biggest thing is a continuing league holds your interest at the end of the year, because even if you're out of the race, you can always go for next year. So it's sort of like in the majors when they introduced playoffs. We all said, oh, this is terrible. We should choose the best. When they split into divisions, we should choose the best team over 162 games. But it is true, with more teams making the playoffs, you have a lot more fans that are still really excited in August and September.
Yeah. And that's what people like about continuing leagues, is even if you're out of the pennant race, you can make trades in August to build for the next year, or at least you can watch some young player in your team that gets called up to the majors and see how he does, so that you can try to decide whether you're going to actually want to protect him the next year. So it does add a lot to the second part of the season that playing in a one-year league takes away. So we have a lot of existing continuing leagues, and many of those have openings. We have a page on our website that lists orphaned continuing teams. We also have a message board on the website that folks use that are in private leagues, which are leagues that find their own owners, and if those leagues are looking for an opening or someone's starting a brand new private league, they usually post on those message boards. You know, David, I'm one of those few old types that like single season leagues the best, and I like those mainly because I really enjoy drafting. And it's just more fun to know that Albert Pujols, for instance, is available, whereas obviously in a continuing league, most of the good players are not available. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's several of our really strong owners, which I have to admit you're one, really like one-year leagues, because of that, you can draft anybody in the league, whereas the better players are already taken in the continuing leagues. And that's certainly the way we started. It's a lot of fun. I think in the continuing leagues, again, the big strategic question around August is to decide when you're out of it and should start going for next year. I know Brian Jones says his rule is if he's more than 10 games back, then he starts building for the future. But in one-year leagues, it's sort of more competitive. It's like, I'm trying to win now. I have the same shot as everybody else. I can draft anybody. Let's go for it.
Yeah, well, they do have the drawback that if you're more than 10 games out come mid-August, or 15 or 20 games out in July or whatever, then in a one-year league there's not much to play for. That is certainly the drawback. I think in that sense, of course, they're not as much fun. And hopefully in August, if you're not in the race for the pennant, you're a football fan and can think about fantasy football.
Yeah, I also think one-year leagues are real good for beginning owners. It's if you really screw up in a perpetual league, it can hurt you for years. Whereas it makes sense to start off in a one-year league, I think. And
yeah, for the first time you play Scoresheet, it's good. I also think that we do have a number of owners that like to have two teams or even more. And so actually, what I do is I have a continuing team and I have a one-year team. Well, I have a couple continuing teams, but if you're thinking of adding a second team, you might think of a one-year team, especially if you already have a continuing team, because then you have that team to keep your interest up all year, and the one-year team lets you draft some of your favorite players. The other thing we offer in the one-year leagues are combined leagues, where you draft from both the AL and NL. We do that for single-season leagues, so that adds another twist to it.
Yeah, I think there are people that really like that. And for me, the new root leagues that I think you're going to mention is exactly what you said. I'd like to, in addition to the teams I have already, it'd be sort of fun to have a one-year league that will have a lot of San Francisco Giants on it, and I maybe won't take it so seriously, or it won't be so time consuming. I won't plan for 10 years from now, but it'll make being a Giants fan more fun this year, I think, for me.
Yeah, those root leagues that we talked about in the sign-up materials we've been mailing out for the last week, they're just the ones we're setting up are single-season teams, and they're called root leagues because they're based on a major league franchise. That's kind of your root team. So, like you said, if we're Giant fans, the hope is it'd be fun to have a team that's roughly half Giants, and the other half of the team is picked from among other players. And then we've done our best to design it so that the team that's the best in the major leagues doesn't automatically win.
Yeah, I think that's right. Everybody chooses their own root team before the season starts, and then you choose players from your root team. You have to in rounds 1, 3, and 5, and 4 more by round 16, and all of rounds 17 to 31. So the stronger teams will get better players maybe in those rounds, maybe. But in the other rounds, the weaker teams pick first, plus the stronger teams' players may get taken more. So there may be more players left on the weaker teams for round 17 through 31. The other thing, you mentioned public and private leagues. I think we should say that we have, in private leagues, we pretty much let our customers develop whatever rules they want. Though I have kind of noticed over the years, they seem to get closer and closer to our rules and our web drafts. And, I think people like how we've set things up. But if you want to tweak some of these parameters, exactly how many players you keep or exactly how many people you choose from your root team, people can and do set up their own leagues and do that. And we support that.
Right, and by private, we mean, when we say private or public, what we mean are private leagues are ones where a group of guys get together and find their own owners, either friends or people that met on the web or whatever. And the public leagues are the ones where Scoresheet takes individuals and puts them in a league with other individuals, and we act as a commissioner for the league, and the public leagues all follow the same set of standard rules. And even if you do a private league, you can still use our web draft if you want, either for the preseason draft and or for the in-season drafts. Or you could do a mix, do your own draft in the preseason, use our web draft for the in-season drafts. As David said, we're pretty flexible. So there are a pretty fair number of choices out there. And then on a different subject, David said something to me today, reminded me about platooning players. What did you say about left-handed batters, David?
Oh, left-handed batters, there's actually a mathematical reason for this, but they tend to have bigger platoon splits than right-handed batters because there are more righties in the world than lefties. And so if you look at some big left-handed sluggers, or some more mediocre left-handed players, you really should think about sitting them versus left-handed pitchers, especially the guys that aren't superstars. And if you've got a right-handed backup that's anywhere near as good, he probably is much better against left-handed pitchers.
Yeah, I think by mathematical reason what you meant was that there's just so many more right-handed pitchers as these players go through high school and college and the minor leagues and all. A left-handed batter just doesn't get, I think, as much experience batting against left-handed pitchers is maybe the reason for that.
Yeah, there's also a thing with the averages and how it works out. It's sort of like lefties get a little, if you can think of it, that they almost get an unfair advantage. They get to face more right-handed pitchers, so their average looks a little better than it would be if the world was 50-50. And for righties, it's the other way. So some of the lefties out there aren't quite as good a hitter as you think they are if the world was 50-50, whereas the righties are a little better than you think they are if the world was 50-50. So it just turns out there are more left-handed batters where it's more important to bench them versus left-handed pitchers than if your starter's right-handed, you probably just want to play them both ways.
Right. I mean, obviously, if you have the time, you can look up their splits. We put a page up on the web that shows everyone's splits in the last 2 years. But if you're just making a lineup and you don't want to look at a bunch of numbers, I think what David says, right, you got a right-handed player and he's your better player, you just plain start him against both righties and lefties. But if you have a left-handed batter, he has to be pretty good for me to want to start him against a left-handed pitcher. Even guys like Ryan Howard, he hits like 100 points worse against left-handed pitchers than right-handed pitchers. So against a lefty, he's a very mediocre batter.
Yeah, it's really surprising. And there's a bunch of other strategy, obviously, to the game, but this is a major thing. And I also want to say about the league sort of tying this in, just a basic point maybe everybody knows. We use the same game simulation with left or right-handed batters or probabilities in all our leagues. The difference is in the private leagues, you basically can run whatever kind of draft you want. So you could have an auction draft, or you can keep a lot of players from year to year, or a few players, or you can pick in whatever order you want. You can make different guys eligible. So it's really the trading and drafting, you can make whatever rules you want, but we still play our same game simulation, which we try to make, as realistic as we can.
Right. Yeah, no matter what type of league you're in, the game engine is the same. Well, hopefully you've thought maybe we mentioned something you hadn't thought of before, and we hope you have a great rest of the week.